again, if the poorest, most molested people were by and large the jihadists and the engineers and the architects and the doctors, the people who had a benefit of the good life were disproportionately moderate, then this analysis of yours would make some sense. But we have someone like Ayman al-Zawahiri, right? A surgeon. He comes from one of the most respected families in Egypt. He's got doctors and judges and pharmacists as far as the eye can see. He is not an exception. He is not. If you correct for literacy in the Muslim world, support for suicide bombing goes up. I mean, this is the most radicalized people are not the people who, in particular, well, you can see this in microcosm when you actually look at the biographies of the 19 hijackers. These were all college educated. Many of them had PhDs. I mean, it's just not religion really is separable as the most important variable. And what is actually right on the surface to be seen is that these people are telling us what is motivating them. The jihadis are talking all day long about the pleasures that await martyrs in paradise, the horrors of living in proximity with the infidels, the desecration of the Muslim holy sites by the proximity of infidel troops on the ground. I mean, this is, Osama bin Laden tells us what motivates him. He's telling us why he's not living in Paris and dating models with his inheritance. I mean, he is being quite articulate ad nauseum. And so to deny the role that religion is playing, I would never for a moment say that there are not poor, mistreated people driven to extremis and to extreme violence for reasons other than religion. Of course, that happens. But this is a separable component which we have rendered, by the terms of our discourse, by our emotional attachment to it, immune to criticism. It is taboo to say that the Quran is bogus as a document that describes the history of the evolution of our species, as a document that makes really cogent prescriptions about how to live in the 21st century, as is the Bible. Almost entirely bogus if you're going to take it as a text to live by. It is taboo to say that. You could not possibly get elected in this country if you even openly doubted whether or not there was a creator God listening to the prayers of your constituents. I mean, this is the world we are living in, and it's
well, Sam, I have to say, I'm not sure what world you're living in, but if it were taboo to say those things, then I don't think you would have sold 500,000 copies of your book.
500,000 copies is the 25 million copies of The Purpose-Driven Life being sold. I mean,
those are vastly different books and vastly different audiences.
Yes.
But I think, look, Zawahiri, and I'm so glad that you brought this up, because Zawahiri wasn't a jihadist until he was placed in the dank and sadistic prisons of Egypt and tortured. And then when he came out, then he became a jihadist.
Well, that's actually not true.
No, it's absolutely true.
Well,
he was a member.
Read The Looming Tower.
I know Lawrence Wright. We've talked about this. He himself, Zawahiri, was, of course, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. But the Muslim Brotherhood is not a jihadist organization.
Close enough, by my lights.
That, again, indicates the profound unsophistication that you have about this region. To think that there is a connection between the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and Al-Qaeda, that they are exactly the same thing. Or
I'm not saying they're the same thing, but
that they're close enough.
The ideology is so close in its divisiveness.
You could not be more wrong in that case.
Well, we've read the same book.
This is not the issue. The issue isn't that poor people become suicide bombers. Everybody knows that that's not true. Mm-hmm. The point is that, and you read Bin Laden, his justifications for the terrorist acts are not religious justifications.
They're not?
No, not at all. He says very clearly, it's because of Palestine. It's because of troops in Saudi Arabia. It's because of now what's going on in Iraq. Now, these we can say are false constructs, that he doesn't really mean these things, and certainly he's never done anything to help.
But they're theological grievances.
No, they're not. And that is exactly where I think you're misunderstanding what's happening. They're social grievances, they are political grievances, they are economic grievances, and like everybody on earth, they are framed in the language of religion. You know, we stand here in the United States, one of the most religious countries in the world, as Sam, you certainly know, a country in which we are perfectly comfortable when our politicians, even those that are nominally religious, use the most distinct religious language to talk about purely social or economic or political issues, it's perfectly normal for us because, of course, we understand that that kind of language is the language that holds the most currency with the masses. We are, of course, embroiled in a war between good and evil, are we not? I mean, again, but somehow when a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt uses the same kind of religious language to talk about his economic agenda, we immediately label it as theocratic or Islamist or fundamentalist in some way. There are people who have, legitimately or not, very serious grievances with what they see as or how they understand a legitimate resistance to what they view as an attack upon their very identities. And of course, identity goes far deeper than just simply cultural or social or national or religious. It's a combination of those things. And who have used the language of religion to give voice to that opposition, to give voice to that resistance. In very extreme and very unusual cases, that identity, that attack on an identity, that language leads to horrific acts of violence. But to sort of reduce it to, well, it's, you know, it's not about, you know, being poor or being about rich, that, you know, he was a doctor and he became a jihadist, therefore, you know, it must have been religion that influenced him to do it and not his you know, poverty or for any situation. Again, I think that's a real, it's a real sort of oversimplification of a very complex issue that has much more to do with one's identity than it does with one's faith.
Let me pause our conversation for a moment. I want to point out to the audience that there was a very telling moment in the writer's life that just passed before your eyes, which is that when Reza and I meet an author who sold 500,000 copies, we're pretty damn impressed. But when you've sold 500,000 copies, you're looking at 25 million as a price. Sam, I'd like to ask you how you can reconcile the statements, the generalizations that you feel comfortable in making about Islam and the Islamic world when we are confronted every night, hammered every night, by the reality that the problem in Iraq is the problem that within an Islamic nation there are Sunni Muslims fighting Shiite Muslims, and then there are Kurdish Muslims who are fighting both of them.
Right.
I mean, and in this I'm joining Reza in imploring you, is there not more diversity and pluralism in the Islamic world than perhaps you're giving it credit for?
Yeah, and nobody is suffering from the diversity in the Islamic world more than Muslims. I mean, we have in Iraq right now Shia and Sunni drilling holes into each other's brains with power tools in the suburbs of Baghdad. People, I would argue, who would not otherwise be engaged in this behavior but for their incompatible religious identities. I mean, they are caught in a blood feud which has all of the character of non-religious blood feuds. I mean, vendetta, it goes back for centuries. No doubt we stirred up this hornet's nest with our intrusion there, which I think has been hideous and utterly misconceived and misapplied, as I think we could probably all agree. But the reality is that if Iraq were all Sunni and there was no religious difference to be exploited by this crucible that we have placed these people in, I don't think you would have the same character of violence. They have defined, the Sunni especially, have defined the Shia as apostates, and across that gulf, they have managed to completely dehumanize them. And this is now spiraling out of control. If you want to step back from it, the real issue is tribalism. The real issue is us-them thinking. The real issue is instrumental violence where you don't really care to kill the person who killed your son. You'll just kill one of his sons, or you'll just kill someone who's a part of the same group. That kind of breakdown of empathy, ultimately, is enabled massively by the fact that we have these competing religious identities in the world.